Settle this. 48 hours after the Justice Department told us about a covert operation that the Russians mounted against our election, the President of the United States has not told us how he plans to respond, how he plans to prevent it from happening again. And don't forget, some of these same intelligence officials were on the Hill last week telling us that the Russians are continuing to meddle in our politics. They're going to attack the 2018 midterms. What is the President doing about it?
You know what I wonder if you know, all this conversation about Russian meddling in 2018 continues to mount if Republicans then use it to say, oh, well, see, all these Democrats that won, you know, that we think are going to win seats in 2018. Yeah, that was all collusion with the Russians. So invalid.
Set up for the next cycle, right?
There is a politically viable path for them to take, which is seizing on the Russian efforts to sow dissent. Trump actually, I think, articulated this fairly well in that first tweet that you showed, saying it's not about me. It's not about them trying to elect me, even though there is some evidence that they did certainly favor him over Hillary Clinton.
Eventually, anyway.
But to say that it was more about the efforts to sow discord in the American political system, and those continue even after Trump is president. If they seized on that and actually launch an effort to work with the Hill to try to heighten these efforts to prevent future meddling, I think that would be a way for them to say, we are taking this seriously. Instead, he just continues to brush it aside, and that is sort of harder for him to justify with what his own national security team is saying.
In that last tweet, he went on to say that the Russians didn't have any influence. That's simply not true. It's the fact that maybe they didn't break in and change ballot counts like that. But as a campaign professional, you've got 13 operatives and you've got a multi-million-dollar budget and you're advertising like crazy. Of course it had an effect. It's unquantifiable whether it would change the election, but it clearly had an effect. Yeah,
I mean, the piece of this, Julia, that I keep tripping over is this man is the commander-in-chief, and he doesn't seem to have taken, I mean, it's obvious to say he hasn't taken the step from being a candidate to being the president, but in this case, the stakes are just so incredibly high.
But I feel like we say this every week. Every week something happens that he doesn't like, and he attacks the FBI or the Justice Department or some other, remember when he attacked the judiciary?
Right.
You know, he just, I don't think anything matters to him but him and his own personal reputation and his butt.
So the question here, the greater question, something I'm very interested in, is how all of this online activity found its way into our real lives. So following the indictment filed by Robert Mueller, the New York Times published a report detailing the nature of Russian election infiltration online. The Times writes, quote, around mid-2015, the Russians began buying digital ads to spread their messages. A year later, they tapped their followers to help organize political rallies across the United States. NBC's Left Field and journalist Katie Engelhart released a documentary focused on how one small town in Idaho was hit with that exact kind of Russian influence.
In 2016, there was this Facebook event advertised in Twin Falls, Idaho, an anti-refugee, anti-Muslim political rally, apparently organized online by a group of locals. Due to the town of Twin Falls, Idaho, becoming a center of refugee resettlement, which led to the huge upsurge of violence towards American citizens, we must stop taking in Muslim refugees! Exclamation point. Only recently, Facebook revealed that the event actually came from a fake account with ties to the Kremlin.
Engelhart notes that the Twin Falls group was trying to target residents like this man, who runs a local group seeking to end refugee resettlement.
The Facebook group Secured Borders, this is the one that's alleged to be organized out of Russia. Do you believe the news reported by outlets like the Daily Beast and the New York Times that Russia was using social media to interfere politically in Twin Falls? Do you believe it?
I really don't believe the Russians had any legal involvement. I mean, they have RT, a network, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I do go online and watch RT occasionally.
You know, it's like a Russian government-backed news organization.
Yes, it is. It's funded and backed by the Russian government.
So I would just like to point out that that documentary series is called After Truth, which seems to be the type of world we're living in if you listen to what that gentleman was essentially saying. And this is a situation where, yes, we think of it as online. Oh, I'm scrolling through my Facebook newsfeed, Ken Vogel, and I'm seeing something that perhaps the Russians are trying to, influence my thinking, like I might, go buy a pair of shoes. But this was Russian-backed efforts that led people to take actual actions that seems like a connection. It seems just like an completely uncharted territory. And the other thing I think we learned from the indictment too was just how deeply Facebook was, or potentially how much responsibility they might have for all of this.
Yeah, it definitely shows the risk, and it shows the blueprint that someone could follow to, by spending a lot of money and investing a lot in human resources to try to sow discord or even achieve a particular result in a given election campaign. That said, and I've heard Julia talk about this in the past, I don't think it was as sophisticated as we have sort of, not as the indictment, but as we have received it. They tried, they tried to stage these rallies in Florida, and some of my former colleagues at Politico went and looked at the press releases for these rallies, and they're like riddled with grammatical errors, and there are questions about how many people actually turned out. So they definitely tried. They spent a lot. They had a sophisticated operation, but as to whether the results were actually sophisticated and showed that, I think the jury is still out.
What's your take on that, Julia?
I agree with Ken Vogel, but I think it's going to be impossible to measure in general, because they were to some voters they were saying stay home, some they were saying come out and vote. I think what's interesting is that it shows us that this was, just as much as it was a pro-Donald Trump operation, it was also an anti-Hillary Clinton operation, because they also supported Bernie Sanders. They supported Jill Stein, who, let's recall, sat at that same RT dinner next to Mike Flynn and Vladimir Putin. So this wasn't just to sow discord. This was to
and there's personal
very much
animus between the two of them, right? Between Hillary Clinton and Vladimir Putin.
Well, so and this gets at the the Russian response to the indictment, which has been, oh, and you guys never meddle in elections. What does National Endowment for Democracy do? What did you guys do in 1996 when Russians were afraid that the communists would take power 5 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union? A lot of American political consultants came to Moscow and helped. They see our democracy promotion, our toppling of Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi as part of the, basically what they did, and they've been trying to say there's more than one, regime change game in town.
Fascinating. We are just getting started.